Søren R. by Kierkegaard, the 5th of May 1813 to 11 November 1855, was a Danish philosopher, theologian, poet, social critic and religious author who is widely considered to be the first existentialist philosopher. He wrote critical texts on organized religion, Christendom, morality, ethics, psychology, and the philosophy of religion, displaying a fondness for metaphor, irony and parables. Much of his philosophical work deals with the issues of how one lives as a single individual, giving priority to concrete human reality over abstract thinking and highlighting the importance of personal choice and commitment. He was against literary critics who defined idealist intellectuals and philosophers of his time. Swedenborg, Hegel, Goethe, Victor, Schelling, Schlegel and Hans Christian Andersen were all understood far too quickly by scholars. Kierkegaard's theological work focuses on Christian ethics, the institution of the Church, the differences between purely objective proofs of Christianity, the infinite qualitative distinction between man and God, and the individual's subjective relationship to the God-man Jesus the Christ, which came through faith. Much of his work deals with Christian love. He was extremely critical of the practice of Christianity as a state religion, primarily that of the Church of Denmark. His psychological work explored the emotions and feelings of individuals when faced with life choices. Kierkegaard's early work was written under various pseudonyms that he used to present distinctive viewpoints and to interact with each other in complex dialogue. He explored particularly complex problems from different viewpoints, each under a different pseudonym. He wrote many upbuilding discourses under his own name and dedicated them to the single individual who might want to discover the meaning of his works. Notably, he wrote, "Science and scholarship want to teach that becoming objective is the way. Christianity teaches that the way is to become subjective, to become a subject, while scientists can learn about the world by observation." Kierkegaard emphatically denied that observation could reveal the inner workings of the world of the spirit. Some of Kierkegaard's key ideas include the concept of truth as subjectivity, the night of faith, the recollection and repetition dichotomy, angst, the infinite qualitative distinction, faith as a passion, and the three stages on life's way. Kierkegaard's writings were written in Danish and were initially limited to Scandinavia, but by the turn of the 20th century, his writings were translated into major European languages, such as French and German. By the mid-20th century, his thought exerted a substantial influence on philosophy, theology, and Western culture. Early years. Søren Kierkegaard was born to an affluent family in Copenhagen. His mother, Ane Sorensdatter Lund Kierkegaard, had served as a maid in the household before marrying his father, Michael Pedersen Kierkegaard. She was an unassuming figure, quiet, plain, and not formally educated, but Henriette Lund, her granddaughter, wrote that she wielded the scepter with joy and protected Søren and Peter like a hen protecting her chicks. His father was a very stern man, to all appearances dry and prosaic, but under his rustic cloak demeanor he concealed an active imagination which not even his great age could blunt. He read the philosophy of Christian Wolff. Kierkegaard preferred the comedies of Ludwig Holberg, the writings of Georg Johann Hamann, Gotthold Ephraim Lessing, Edward Young and Plato, especially those referring to Socrates. Copenhagen in the 1830s and 1840s had crooked streets where carriages rarely went. Kierkegaard loved to walk them. In 1848, Kierkegaard wrote, "I had real Christian satisfaction in the thought that, if there were no other, there was definitely one man in Copenhagen whom every poor person could freely accost and converse with on the street, that, if there were no other, there was one man who, whatever the society he most commonly frequented, did not shun contact with the poor, but greeted every maidservant he was acquainted with, every manservant, every common labourer." Our Lady's Church was at one end of the city, where Bishop Meinster preached the gospel. At the other end was the Royal Theatre where Fru Heiberg performed. based on a speculative interpretation of anecdotes in Kierkegaard's unpublished journals, especially a rough draft of a story called The Great Earthquake. Some early Kierkegaard scholars argued that Michael believed he had earned God's wrath and that none of his children would outlive him. He is said to have believed that his personal sins, perhaps indiscretions such as cursing the name of God in his youth or impregnating Aine out of wedlock, necessitated this punishment. Though 5 of his 7 children died before he did, both Kierkegaard and his brother Peter Christian Kierkegaard outlived him. Peter, who was 7 years Kierkegaard elder, later became bishop in Aalborg. Julia Watkin thought Mitchell's early interest in the Moravian Church could have led him to a deep sense of the devastating effects of sin. Kierkegaard came to hope that no one would retain their sins even though they have been forgiven, and by the same token that no one who truly believed in the forgiveness of sin would live their own life as an objection against the existence of forgiveness. He made the point that Cato committed suicide before Caesar had a chance to forgive him. This fear of not finding forgiveness is devastating. Edna H. Hong quoted Kierkegaard in her 1984 book Forgiveness as a Work as well as a Grace, and Kierkegaard wrote about forgiveness in 1847. In 1954, Samuel Barber set to music Kierkegaard's prayer, Father in Heaven, hold not our sins up against us, but hold us up against our sins, so that the thought of you when it wakens in our soul, and each time it wakens, should not remind us of what we have committed, but of what you did forgive, not of how we went astray, but of how you did save us. In 1830, Kierkegaard attended the School of Civic Virtue, Osterborgade Gymnasium, when the school was situated in Clare-Bodmer, where he studied Latin and history among other subjects. He went on to study theology at the University of Copenhagen. He had little interest in historical works, philosophy dissatisfied him, and he couldn't see dedicating himself to speculation. He said, "What I really need to do is to get clear about what am I to do, not what I must know." He wanted to lead a completely human life and not merely one of knowledge. Kierkegaard didn't want to be a philosopher in the traditional or Hegelian sense, and he didn't want to preach a Christianity that was an illusion. But he had learned from his father that one can do what one wills, and his father's life had not discredited this theory. One of the first physical descriptions of Kierkegaard comes from an attendee, Hans Brockner, at his brother Peter's wedding party in 1836. I found his appearance almost comical. He was then 23 years old. He had something quite irregular in his entire form and had a strange coiffure. His hair rose almost 6 inches above his forehead into a tousled crest that gave him a strange, bewildered look. Another comes from Kierkegaard's niece, Henriette Lund. When Søren Kierkegaard was a little boy, he was of slender and delicate appearance, and ran about in a little coat of red cabbage color. He used to be called Fork by his father, because of his tendency, developed quite early, toward satirical remarks. Although a serious, almost austere tone pervaded the Kierkegaard house, I have the firm impression that there was a place for youthful vivacity too, even though of a more sedate and homemade kind than one is used to nowadays. The house was open for an old-fashioned hospitality. Kierkegaard's mother was a nice little woman with an even and happy disposition, according to a grandchild's description. She was never mentioned in Kierkegaard's works. Aine died on the 31st of July 1834, aged 66, possibly from typhus. His father died on the 8th of August 1838, age 82. On the 11th of August, Kierkegaard wrote, "My father died on Wednesday at 2 a.m. I so deeply desired that he might have lived a few years more. Right now I feel there is only one person with whom I can really talk about him. He was a faithful friend. Charles Frederick Lund, his nephew, was instrumental in providing biographers with much information regarding Søren Kierkegaard. Journals. According to Samuel Hugo Bergman, Kierkegaard journals are one of the most important sources for an understanding of his philosophy. Kierkegaard wrote over 7,000 pages in his journals on events, musings, thoughts about his works and everyday remarks. The entire collection of Danish journals was edited and published in 13 volumes consisting of 25 separate bindings including indices. The first English edition of the journals was edited by Alexander Drew in 1938. The style is literary and poetic in manner. Kierkegaard wanted to have Regine, his fiancée, as his confidant but considered it an impossibility for that to happen, so he left it to my reader, that single individual, to become his confidant. His question was whether or not one can have a spiritual confidant. He wrote the following in his concluding postscript: with regard to the essential truth, a direct relation between spirit and spirit is unthinkable. If such a relation is assumed, it actually means that the party has ceased to be spirit. Goethe had said the same thing earlier in his book Faust. Faust, thou, who around the wide world wendest, thou busy spirit, how near I feel to thee. Spirit, thou'rt like the spirit which thou comprehendest, not me. Kierkegaard journals were the source of many aphorisms credited to the philosopher. The following passage, from the 1st of August 1835, is perhaps his most oft-quoted aphorism and a key quote for existentialist studies. What I really need is to get clear about what I must do, not what I must know, except in so far as knowledge must precede every act. What matters is to find a purpose, to see what it really is that God wills that I shall do. The crucial thing is to find a truth which is truth for me, to find the idea for which I am willing to live and die. He wrote this way about indirect communication in the same journal entry: one must first learn to know himself before knowing anything else. Not until a man has inwardly understood himself and then sees the course he is to take does his life gain peace and meaning. Only then is he free of that irksome, sinister traveling companion, that irony of life, which manifests itself in the sphere of knowledge and invites true knowing to begin with the not knowing, just as God created the world from nothing. But in the waters of morality it is especially at home to those who still have not entered the trade wind of virtue. Here it tumbles a person about in a horrible way, for a time lets him feel happy and content in his resolve to go ahead along the right path, then hurls him into the abyss of despair. Often it lulls a man to sleep with the thought, after all, things cannot be otherwise, only to awaken him suddenly to a rigorous interrogation. Frequently it seems to let a veil of forgetfulness fall over the past, only to make every single trifle appear in a strong light again. When he struggles along the right path, rejoicing in having overcome temptation's power, there may come at almost the same time, right on the heels of perfect victory, an apparently insignificant external circumstance which pushes him down, like Sisyphus, from the height of the crag. Often when a person has concentrated on something, a minor external circumstance arises which destroys everything. Frequently a person feels his very best when the illness is the worst, as in tuberculosis. In vain he tries to resist it, but he has not sufficient strength, and it is no help to him that he has gone through the same thing many times. The kind of practice acquired in this way does not apply here. Although his journals clarify some aspects of his work and life, Kierkegaard took care not to reveal too much. Abrupt changes in thought, repetitive writing, and unusual turns of phrase are some among the many tactics he used to throw readers off track. Consequently, there are many varying interpretations of his journals. Kierkegaard did not doubt the importance his journals would have in the future. In December 1849, he wrote, "Were I to die now, the effect of my life would be exceptional. Much of what I have simply jotted down carelessly in the journals would become of great importance and have a great effect, for then people would have grown reconciled to me and would be able to grant me what was and is my right. Regine Olsen and graduation, an important aspect of Kierkegaard's life, generally considered to have had a major influence on his work, was his broken engagement to Regine Olsen. Kierkegaard and Olsen met on the 8th of May 1837 and were instantly attracted to each other, but sometime around the 11th of August 1838 he had second thoughts. In his journals, Kierkegaard wrote idealistically about his love for her. "You, sovereign queen of my heart, Regina, hidden in the deepest secrecy of my breast, in the fullness of my life idea, there where it is just as far to heaven as to hell, unknown divinity." Oh, can I really believe the poets when they say that the first time one sees the beloved object he thinks he has seen her long before? That love, like all knowledge, is recollection. That love in the single individual also has its prophecies, its types, its myths, its Old Testament. Everywhere, in the face of every girl, I see features of your beauty. Journals and papers of Søren Kierkegaard, the 11th of August 1838. On the 8th of September 1840, Kierkegaard formally proposed to Olsen. He soon felt disillusioned about his prospects. He broke off the engagement on the 11th of August 1841, though it is generally believed that the two were deeply in love. In his journals, Kierkegaard mentions his belief that his melancholy made him unsuitable for marriage, but his precise motive for ending the engagement remains unclear. Kierkegaard then turned his attention to his examinations. On the 13th of May 1839, he wrote, "I have no alternative than to suppose that it is God's will that I prepare for my examination, and that it is more pleasing to him that I do this, than actually coming to some clearer perception by immersing myself in one or another sort of research." On the 29th of September 1841, Kierkegaard wrote and defended his dissertation on the concept of irony with continual reference to Socrates. The university panel considered it noteworthy and thoughtful, but too informal and witty for a serious academic thesis. The thesis dealt with irony in Skelling's 1841 lectures, which Kierkegaard had attended with Mikhail Bakunin, Jacob Burckhardt, and Friedrich Engels. Each had come away with a different perspective. Kierkegaard graduated from university on the 20th of October 1841 with a Magisterartium. He was able to fund his education, his living, and several publications of his early works with his family's inheritance of approximately 31,000 Rigsdaler.